Abraham Maslow talks about mystical experiences, what he calls peak experiences. And he says there are kind of 5 components that people feel some big physical change, like what our guys were describing, a big connection to all that is, a big sense of oneness, a blinding epiphany of meaning, like they understand everything about the universe, everything makes sense to them. And finally, a real big sense of rejuvenation. And my guys were reporting all of those things. Aside from feeling these physical effects, they were talking about incredible feelings of oneness. They were talking about feeling much more peaceful in their lives. I'd surveyed them a month or 2 after the experiment finished, and they were talking about how they were getting along better with everybody. Suddenly their relationships were improving. This was about half of all the people surveyed. But the biggest effect was they were getting along. They were in love with everybody they were coming into contact with. They were hugging strangers. It was bizarre. And they were also talking about really peace changing their lives. This rejuvenation kind of manifested as a renewed life's purpose. A number quit their job and decided to go to do the thing they'd always wanted to do, or to join the Peace Corps, or to work for peace. It was uncanny.
This is episode 34 of the Ownstream podcast featuring Lynne McTaggart. All right, welcome to the Ownstream podcast. This is Stephen Shelley, and this week I am flying solo. We are recording this, or I'm recording this from Ucluelet, Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. We're on our big van trip, and this was recorded in mid-September, and it's released in late September. So in any event, there's no Teresa in this interview with Lynne McTaggart. She is out and about with our daughter Sophia as I record this conversation with Lynne from our hotel room. So anyway, just so you understand why this is very much me and not the usual combo of her and I. She's out with Sophia someplace, and I am sitting here at a beautiful kitchen table in this hotel room looking over a harbor beyond which is the ocean. It's a beautiful spot in western British Columbia on Vancouver Island. But this conversation with Lynne McTaggart was extraordinary. I literally just hung up with her, and if you're not familiar with Lynne, then this is going to be a really, really fun hour for you. She, like me, like many people, I think, kind of came out of her early life with very much a trust and belief in science. And we don't trash science. I'm not here to trash science. But much of what I think I learned in high school and college is almost irrelevant at this point. Particularly in terms of thinking about what the human being is. What is a person? What are we in fact? And she tracks her story very eloquently. I won't recount that. Please be sure to listen to that. It's in the first 10 to 15 minutes. But her findings are profound in that she's discovered that we are consciousness. We are all a part of a field of energy. And her recent work really focuses on the power of intention, and in specific, the power of groups of 8 people who are focused on one specific intention. Often it's a healing intention, or to reduce crime or death in a war-torn area, etc. And it's spectacular stuff, what she's going to lay out here. What she describes is truly, truly remarkable. It kind of goes beyond our traditional notions of what's really happening here on Earth, what's really happening here within communities of people, and what's really happening with the power of thought and intention. So this is what this conversation is really about. And for me, we found Lynne McTaggart at the perfect time, and maybe this is happening for you at the perfect time, where I was really believing more and more in kind of the new age spiritual writers, self-improvement writers, things like Law of Attraction, things like The Secret. I had read Abraham Hicks. I had watched The Secret. And I had been exposed to various other healers and other thinkers and teachers. But some part of me wasn't willing or able to step fully into that reality that was proposed, mainly due to my own conditioning, mainly due to believing truly in what I see, what I hear, the sensual world, if you will. And so I stumbled across her book, I think it's about 10 years old now, called The Field, where she, in fact, comes from a very similar background, but through her investigative journalistic practices came across some resources, and in fact, it started with health and healing and within the world of medicine, and learned that there's actually way much more to what's going on here than meets the eye. It led her into this project called The Field, where she, in fact, pulls everything apart and discovers this absolutely immaculate web of a quantum field of energy that connects us all, and that actually is who we are, that we are all one. And so for Teresa and I, we're also quite interested in the teachings of Bentinho Massaro, the Law of One, and this other kind of world. And Lynne is saying the same things that Bentinho is saying, that many other spiritual teachers are saying, but just from a scientific angle. And it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. And really, Lynne is here to report on the latest findings of kind of quantum science and how they are discovering the exact same thing that Bentinho, that all the great sages, all the great mystics, all the great teachers across the millennia have discovered, that we are one, that we are consciousness, that in fact we are all God and creators of our reality and the universe. And it's beautiful. So if you're kind of coming out of like maybe a Western mindset, as I did, what Lynne offers is invaluable, no doubt about it. And you'll find in this interview, I think I ask maybe half a dozen questions, if that. I mean, I'll ask her questions and she'll go for 15 minutes. And it's not like she's rambling. She is incredibly focused and incredibly clear and is truly trying to disseminate this powerful message that she is the conveyor of, that she is the speaker of. And it's endlessly interesting, endlessly fascinating, easily the easiest interview I've ever done, because she's so well versed and such a pro at this. And I think also coming from a writing background, she's quite good at messaging her subject. So you're in for a treat. The interview itself really focuses on what she's found in the last, say, half a dozen years or less regarding the power of intention and really the power of groups of 8 people who are focused on a certain intention. And not only how that intention manifests wherever it's projected to, if you will, its target, so to speak, which are absolutely tangible, real, and data tracked improvements, but really how they serve the group, the people who are within the body of those intending for a result actually receive so much from that as well, which if you are a student of spirituality, certainly what Bentinho is talking about, and Ra and the Law of One, service to others, service to others, service to others. It's the time for service to others. And how what Lynne is describing is really just saying that from another point of view, from another angle, but the exact same thing. Serving others, we serve ourselves, because in fact we are all one. So this is a wonderful conversation. You're in for a treat. She does talk about her new book, which by the time this interview airs is out. It's called The Power of 8. I urge you to get this book, form your own little group, and start exploring this very, very, very powerful material. I think we will do that, and we hope you will as well. I'll be back afterwards very quickly to wrap up, but until then, please enjoy this wonderful conversation with Lynne McTaggart. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. Lynne McTaggart, thank you for joining us. Teresa would usually be here, but she's actually out with our daughter. but thanks for being with us. It's an honor to have you on the Ownstream podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here with you.
Yeah. It's fun to connect with people all over the world using technology. It's a real kick. And I guess by way of introduction, I should just briefly talk about kind of how I came across your work, and as a way to kind of begin our chat. And it was a number of years ago, and I was kind of just having my own awakening, I suppose. And I was really wanting, and it could have even been like I think I intended to find a book that merged science and consciousness or spirituality. And I had been studying spirituality for many years and had been reading many of the great sages from the East and many others, but was very keen to find some sort of scientific look at this, and that's when I found The Field, your great book, and it just, I don't know, it checked so many boxes for me. It helped me so much kind of step more into what I would call, I guess, a quantum reality, which is really more a true understanding of who we are and what we're doing here. So that book kind of led me into your work and following you, and I have to say, I think that book is a tremendously important book for people, because I think a lot of people are like me, kind of transitioning from, a world of believing in form and believing in what we see, and what your book does is tie that to this field of energy that you so eloquently describe.
Thank you very much.
And so I guess what I'm interested in is maybe if you could take us back, into your earlier years growing up, and maybe give us some sense of where you came from, and specifically if there were instances then of you being interested in more than what you just saw in front of you. If there were any occasions or even experiences that you might have had that kind of caused you to question the reality as we're presented with.
I think I've always been a bit of a disruptor, and somebody who's been interested in transforming or even, tearing down what is and creating new. I mean, that's always been part of my personality, I think, and that as a teenager, that came out in just exploration into different kinds of consciousness and interest in higher consciousness. But that was then. Mm-hmm. And then I hit adulthood and I became an investigative reporter. And so I was very wedded to digging out facts and, putting bad guys in jail, that right. kind of thing. Right. And so that really just lay dormant. But I was very interested in health. I got very interested in health after editing a column called People's Doctor by a guy called Dr. Robert Mendelsohn when I was a managing editor of a New York News, Chicago Tribune syndicate. And this is still in America. Mm-hmm. And he was savaging medicine. Here was this very kindly Jewish grandfatherly doctor who was totally radical. And that kind of stayed with me. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to England after writing a couple of books. In the course of writing one book, I ended up here, met my husband, fell in love, stayed, planted roots here. And in the mid 80s, I got ill and I didn't know what it was, and ultimately couldn't find anybody who knew what it was. Now you'd call it just a faulty microbiome, but at the time it was wreaking havoc with me. And so I researched ultimately what I thought I had, and I found a doctor who was a pioneer in nutritional medicine at the time in the UK, and I thought he could probably help heal me. And he was such a partner in this healing journey. And it was such a heady experience for me to work with somebody who wasn't just doling out drugs and dealing with it as a adult-child relationship, which is most of the doctor-patient relationships.
Right.
And so I got fascinated by that, and my husband and I decided to launch what was a newsletter then called What Doctors Don't Tell You, so we wouldn't have to tell each other about this. We could tell the world. And so in the course of doing that over the years where I was studying the medical literature, this was now in the mid-90s, I kept coming across really good studies of things like spiritual healing and acupuncture and homeopathy. And I kept thinking particularly about spiritual healing. Now, if you can take a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that on its own undermines everything we think about how the world works. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to find out if there's such a thing as human energy fields. Now, I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I managed to talk my publishers into funding a Journey Without a Compass. And so I headed off thinking I'll speak to some frontier scientists. They'll tell me there are human energy fields. I'll write it up and that's it, and publish the book. And I didn't expect what I was going to find, which was a bunch of scientists all finding a little tiny aspect of the same thing, which added up to a revolution in science and a revolution in our understanding of how the world works. And so, and the problem was that being scientists, they talk in code, they talk in math. Right. And so I realized soon enough, and also they don't like to speculate about what their things mean beyond their experimental results. So I realized after a while with some alarm that I was going to have to decode this myself, and I was also going to have to somehow put this all together. So that project became the field. Mm-hmm. And in the course of doing that, there was one thing that really intrigued me, which was the idea that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. But being a reporter, there were plenty of good studies about this. And also, this was the time, a few years after the field came out, when things like The Secret were coming out and information about the law of attraction. And being the hard-nosed journo that I am at heart, I kept thinking, okay, so what can you do with this? Are we talking here about just trying to manifest parking spaces, or can we cure cancer with it? And also, if this is so powerful, what happens if lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? Does that magnify the effect? Mm-hmm. And so I decided to put this to the ultimate test. I, was like a 21st century doubting Thomas. So I just thought, right, I'm going to create the biggest study in the world about this. I'm going to take all of these scientists I know from doing this research, and I'm going to put them together with my readers, who by then numbered from 30 different languages around the world. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, if I put this together and I have them do an intention experiment on my website every so often, I'll have the biggest global laboratory in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And so I invited people with the intention experiment, which was written 10 years ago, to be part of this. And I've run 30 of these experiments, and to date, 26 have had measurable, positive, significant effects. Uh-huh. No drug can claim that. But here's the interesting thing, and why I just published a new book called The Power of 8. That isn't the point of the story. There's some really amazing studies that I've done, and they're in the book, but it's not the point of the story. The point of the story is the completely untoward effects that happened with my participants.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because recently we spoke with Eric Pearl, whom I know you know, Dr. Pearl, and in a very similar way, the healing work that he does is it certainly has an effect, out there, if you will, on the patients or the people that one is intending the energy for, but it has a profound effect on oneself as well. And it sounds like that's exactly what you discovered too.
Yes, and I love Eric. He's a dear friend. Mm-hmm. And the only difference that we have is that mine is really about the power of groups, mm-hmm. and the power of group intention, because what I started looking at was, first of all, all these amazing effects that were going on with my participants, but also what was happening in small groups. Because around 2008, after the intention experiment came out, I thought to myself, well, I guess I should start running workshops. Now, I hadn't really run them before. I'm a journalist, and a writer, not a personal development trainer. And so I thought, well, okay, well, let's see. We'll put them in, we'll have these workshops, but what should I do? And my husband and I were sitting there trying to think about this and brainstorm. And I said, well, maybe I'll just put them into groups of 8 or so. And we'll just have them send intention to one member of the group who's got a health challenge. And Brian said to me, he's a great headline writer, another journalist, and he said, yeah, Power of 8, I love that. So we did our first workshop in Chicago, and we're making it up as we go along. We have no idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, for the intention experiment, I had interviewed a number of masters of intention, master healers, Qigong masters, Buddhist monks. I'd also watched and studied with them, and I also looked at the science of what works best in mind over matter studies in the lab. And while all of these people had certain different techniques, there were a lot of commonalities. And so I tried to take those common techniques and distill them into a simple program everybody could follow. And there were, it was a little program I called Powering Up. Mm-hmm. So I knew I could teach people that, but I wasn't really sure what to do with groups. So we're making it up as we go along. We're talking to people saying, yeah, you all have to hold hands. Now focus on the same thought at the same time. And you can also put the person in the center like the spokes of a wheel, all put a hand on her, but it's got to be an unbroken connection. We're completely making this up. And thinking it's probably going to have an effect a bit like a facial. It'll be a nice little, or massage, a nice little feel-good effect. And so we ask everybody to do this on a Saturday. We then ask them to come back the next day and report on what's going on with them, the people who were sent intention. They line up at the front. We give them the microphone, each of them in turn, and they start reporting on these extraordinary things. There was one woman who had migraines her whole life, and suddenly her headaches were gone. There was another person who suffered constantly with IBS, and that was completely disappeared. There was another person, this is just from our first group, who had arthritis, and she said her pain was completely gone, and on and on and on. And over the years, in every workshop I've run, even teleseminars, so this is only over the internet or on the phone, we'd put people into groups and the same story would happen. There was Laura's mother who had scoliosis, really bad pain. She was completely out of pain at the end of her little Power of 8 group, and her daughter wrote me a couple of months later to say that they'd had to change the rear view mirror on her car because her back had changed so much. And then we had, Paul, who had a brace on his hand. It was hurting so much he couldn't move it. And the following day, the brace was off. He was moving his hand normally, absolutely pain-free. We had a woman with MS who showed up the next day without her crutches. We had a woman with cataracts who said she was 80% better. I mean, ridiculous, amazing healings. Mm-hmm. And I've got to tell you, I hated this because I am not an Eric Pearl. I'm not a healer. I'm somebody who's very fact-based. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of buried the lead of the story, as any journalist can tell you. I didn't want to hear about this. I kept saying, what on earth did I do to these people? And I kept trying to study it and go back to my big important intention experiments, because I felt that these weird healing effects were going to undermine what I felt was my serious work, which was trying to prove the power of intention. And so I kind of missed what these people were constantly trying to tell me. And then what was very weird was what happened when I ran the first peace intention experiment I ran back in 2008. I looked all over the world for a target. This is one of the big intention experiments. Mm-hmm. We ran them. We started out basically on the ground floor, and I worked with a number of different scientists because I didn't want it to be just the work of one scientist. So I've worked with Dr. Gary Schwartz of the University of Arizona, the late Rustum Roy from Penn State University, Dr. Jessica Utz, a statistician, professor of statistics at University of California, and Dr. Konstantin Korotkov from St. Petersburg Technical University, and many others. But we started out with little things like seeds and water and leaves and things, and graduated slowly up. And then finally I got sick of seeds and leaves, et cetera, and decided, let's do something huge. Let's try to lower violence in a war-torn area. So I looked all over the world for a place where they were actually counting the bodies, and had done so for several years because I had put together a scientific team, and one of them, Dr. Jessica Utz, the statistician, said, get me 2 years worth of injuries and deaths from before the time we're doing intention and a few months afterward. And then I will look at a statistical timeline, a time analysis, because what you can then do is work out a trend. Is it going up or is it going down over time? And if you buck the trend, then you're onto something. If you just show, a lowering of violence the week after, that could be just total coincidence. This is a little more compelling if you can show a change in the entire trend. So we decided to choose Sri Lanka because that was a place where a 25-year war was going on, and I had all of that data from one organization. So we did this over 8 days, and then we plotted it, and they were sending us information every week about the deaths and injuries. And during the week of intention, actually violence went up horrifically. It quadrupled. And then it plunged to way lower than it had been. And here was what was also interesting. When we analyzed it, yes, it did buck the trend. Violence was going way down for a month or so afterward. But a more interesting thing happened. It turned out that over the 25 years, that very week of our intention proved to be pivotal in the course of the entire war. The government, after that, during that week, won a couple of decisive battles that turned around the course of the war. They had been losing before that. And the rebel fighters had captured the entire North. The government was able to reclaim the North within a few months after those decisive battles. And with 5 more months later, that totally intractable war was over. Now, can we claim credit for that? Did we do this? Short answer, who knows? Right. Because there are a lot of variables in terms of war and what happens. A lot of different things can affect it. But even Jessica Utz, where after she did the time analysis, said, the fact that the really important battles were done just during our week of intention. She had only 2 words to say, which was weird, huh? And yeah, it was weird, huh? Definitely weird. But there was something even more interesting. That wasn't even the point of the story. The thing that happened then was I decided to survey the participants because there had been in the past some issues with people coming on. There were just too many people trying to come onto my website, and it crashed a few times in some of our early experiments. So I wanted to make sure we had a whole new system for it. I wanted to make sure that people could get on. They did. They were able to, but I wanted to find out what their experience was. So I had them answer questionnaires. And I get back thousands of questionnaires. We had about 15,000 people participating. And thousands of them said things like, I felt I was wired to a higher network. I felt unbearable heat. And my skin was tingling, and I had an electrical current in and out of my body. I felt like I was part of that force field that's in Star Trek. I was crying uncontrollably, sobbing. I felt like I was connected on a higher level, and it stopped soon after the experiment. So I thought, whoa, from all of these descriptions, it was like for all the world that people had essentially a mystical experience. And when I looked at what they were saying later, Abraham Maslow talks about mystical experiences, what he calls peak experiences. And he says there are kind of 5 components that people feel some big physical change, like what our guys were describing, a big connection to all that is, a big sense of oneness, a blinding epiphany of meaning, like they understand everything about the universe, everything makes sense to them. And finally, a real big sense of a rejuvenation. And my guys were reporting all of those things. Aside from feeling these physical effects, they were talking about incredible feelings of oneness. They were talking about feeling much more peaceful in their lives. I'd surveyed them a month or 2 after the experiment finished, and they were talking about how they were getting along better with everybody. Suddenly their relationships were improving. This was about half of all the people surveyed. But the biggest effect was they were getting along. They were in love with everybody they were coming into contact with. They were hugging strangers. It was bizarre. And they were also talking about really peace changing their lives. This rejuvenation kind of manifested as a renewed life's purpose. A number quit their job and decided to go to do the thing they'd always wanted to do, or to join the Peace Corps, or to work for peace. It was uncanny, absolutely uncanny. But in every experiment I ran after that relating to peace or healing, we had the same amazing effects. We had physical healings too. So my book, and really from there, again, this scared me. I spent probably close to 10 years trying to figure out what on earth happened to them. And so my book is really all about this amazing rebound effect, this mirror effect that happens during group intention, and why. And whether, and I look at it from all angles, from brainwave studies to the study of just getting off of yourself and focusing on somebody else. And I've concluded that there is a powerful amplified rebound effect that happens in any size group, whether it's 8 or 80,000.
Well, so maybe you can, gosh, that's amazing. And I can't help but comment on how eloquent you are and how passionate. Very often on these interviews, we'll be back and forth a few times every few minutes, but your energy about your experiences and what you've uncovered is magnetic just through the computer. And I'd be interested in so given what you just stated, maybe track back to the field itself and try and I'm sure the book goes into this in great detail, but in a summary form, what is happening here? And maybe for those people who don't understand what the field, the book itself purports or exposes, maybe kind of highlight that in the process. What is really occurring during these powerful 8, these group of 8 experiments or intention experiments?
Okay, well, the field is a quantum energy field that unites us in its invisible web. And that's what I wrote about in the field. But it also, we have to understand that consciousness is not something that's locked inside our heads. We think of consciousness as, or mind as brain. And we're now understanding that that's not really the case. That I think that what I'm observing just reflects a very fundamental principle in quantum physics. And we have to remember that's one of the most valid of all the scientists, but that the energy field of consciousness essentially creates our experience of the world. And, as Einstein once said, the field is the only reality. And also, we also understand that consciousness, the kind of consciousness that creates and shapes our lives, isn't contained within our heads. And we know that that essentially what we're doing is broadcasting. We're broadcasting our consciousness into the field and the field around us. So from just the understanding of our biology, that's really what's going on. The new science basically says our brain is like a receiver and a transmitter all at the same time, but that the real consciousness, even the higher cognitive functions aren't necessarily contained there. They're out there in the field. But what I discovered in trying to understand the power of 8 and the power of 8 million, whether it's large groups or small, really encompasses many other things. First of all, I actually had a study carried out from Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world. I spoke there in 2015, and they offered to put their psychology department at my disposal to study these Power of 8 groups. So I was thrilled, and I worked with a neuroscientist who created a series of studies of groups of 8 people, and would put a QEEG cap on one of the senders and then monitor the effects. And what she found was really remarkable and absolutely shocking to her and to me. There was a global quieting of the brain, essentially, when people are part of this group. But in particular, the parietal lobes, which are sort of behind our ear and above our ear. And they govern our sense of self and not self. So they tell us where we end and the rest of the world begins, so we can navigate ourselves around. They were turned way down. And another thing that was turned way down was the frontal lobes, the executive portions of the brain. This is the part that's involved in, in really decision making and all of those things. But it also is the seat of a lot of things like worry and doubt and negativity. That was turned way down too. So these would be the signatures, and other areas were too. These were the signatures of people who would be experiencing a great sense of oneness, a sense of connection, a sense of something higher, and a sense of positivity and change in their lives. So this was really fascinating, but even more fascinating was the fact that these were the exact brainwave signatures of people like Sufi masters and Buddhist monks in the middle of ecstatic prayer, as studied by a guy called Dr. Andrew Newberg, who has studied these kinds of enlightenment states. And he has found absolutely the same brainwave signature. So our guys were experiencing essentially a spiritual orgasm, is the way you might want to refer to it. And they were having this experience of enlightenment or mystical state. But here's the interesting thing. Unlike most mystical states, it didn't require years of preparation. It didn't require hours of priming to get into that state. It didn't require sweat lodges or ayahuasca or sticking your head between your knees or getting prostrate in prayer. All it needed was a group. And all of these people were able to carry this out and do this after all they'd been exposed to was a 13-minute video of me telling them what to do. That was it. So there is only one conclusion to draw, which is that these small and large groups, essentially all intending together, are a fast track to the miraculous. And there's something beyond, these quantum effects to understand. There are two things that I think are really important. One is the power of altruism, because in all of these instances, these were people setting intention to heal something other than themselves. So unlike most intentions, in fact, unlike the entire self-help movement, this was not about self-help. This was about other help. And so that was one big factor. And I looked at the biology of altruism and found some really interesting things going on there, because when we focus on something else, where we're trying to heal something, we fire up a thing called the vagus nerve. Now, this is the longest nerve in the body, and it connects all of our organs. And in a sense, it's like the love nerve. Mm-hmm. It turns on the release of oxytocin, the love hormone that gets released when mothers are taking care of children, things like that. And it also seems to have a virtuous circle effect on the healing mechanisms of the body, like the immune system. So doing something for someone else is like a bulletproof vest. It really does keep on healing. And you see it in all of the studies. I mean, there was one study, amazing study, of people praying for people with depression. This psychologist wanted to see if prayer worked for depression. So he got a group of people who were suffering from depression, about 400 of them, divided them in two groups, and one group were going to get prayer, and the other groups were going to do the praying. Mm-hmm. And the people who got the prayer definitely had a good effect, but the people who did the praying for them were even better off. They were even less depressed. Uh-huh. So, and this kind of result happens over and over and over again, demonstrating it's better to give than receive, that giving in any regard makes you live longer, makes you healthier, makes you happier. It's just quite extraordinary over and over again. So altruism is a big part of this. Getting off of yourself is a huge part of this.
And so within these groups of 8, what is the practice? What are they doing? Is there visualization involved? Is there kind of a contemplation of energy? What are some of the tools or techniques that they're employing?
Sure. I mean, as I say, I have a whole program called The Power of 8 that's completely described in the book The Power of 8, or the Powering Up experience. Mm-hmm. But it's very simple. Some of the elements of it are a very highly focused mind state. Most people think when you send intention that you should be very quiet, like a meditative state. You might start out with a few deep breaths and some, quieting of the mind, but very soon the mind gets very, very active in terms of focus. So I tell all of my people to focus with their 5 senses. And because when I've looked at intention masters, their brain waves are really operating initially very, very at a very, very high rate. They're intending with every bone of their body. So it's a highly focused mind state, and there is some visualization. I usually ask them to visualize the person being healed, but not everybody is visual. Some people are auditory, or some people are kinesthetic. So whatever is your dominating sense, imagine them well with that sense. So, feel them well, or hear them being well if you're not just visual. And of course, being very specific is another really important factor. Most people are very general about intentions. They'll say stuff like, I want to be rich. And they don't really mean they want to be rich. They mean they want to have another job, or they would like to have more time with their children, or they'd like to spend more time on their hobbies. They don't necessarily just want to have more stuff. So you need to be very specific about healing other people. We found that works best over and over again. The very general intentions don't work anywhere near as well. We found that in all of our big studies, as well as the small group intentions that we've worked with. So that's a really important factor of it too. And it's, as I say, I think the biggest factor is getting off of yourself. And one of the things I do is I run a year-long master class, the Intention Master Class. But I ran a very special one in 2015. I decided to study the people over a year. Mm-hmm. So this was the very first time I did it. And I asked for people who were volunteers, and they came to do this workshop with me. And this was all over the internet, and on the phone. So people had never met me or met each other. And after 7 weeks of training, I then put them into small groups and had them meet regularly over a year. And then I monitored month by month what was going on with these guys. And it was really quite amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Of the people who continued meeting in their groups, which was about 150 people, pretty much 100% of them had major transformational things go on in their lives. One woman had chronic fatigue for 15 years, and she discovered the reason for it, and she is completely fine now. Another guy had lifelong depression. He's not depressed anymore, and he's got down to his fighting weight. He's overcome his writer's block. He's developed a new system for healing. He is a clinical psychologist, so as you can imagine, being chronically depressed is really difficult for him. A woman repigmented she had vitiligo. Her skin is repigmenting. Another woman regained most of her hearing. And then we had amazing things go on with people getting incredible windfalls when they needed it. Money that they needed came to them, and more. People got dream jobs, changed their careers, sold their homes when they needed to, started up a lot of businesses, starting up and doing really well. Mm-hmm. Just incredible, just people. And then relationship healings, making peace with an estranged father and all kinds of things like that. And a husband finally getting behind a woman's desire to work. Amazing stuff. But there were one or two people who weren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. This was about halfway through the year. Nothing was working. There was a woman called Andy, and nothing was working for her. And so, she was getting divorced, and she was also selling her gift store business. Mm-hmm. And she had very uncertain income in every regard and nothing she could do, sending all kinds of intentions, trying to go back to her seed moment to try to find out where she got a feeling of scarcity, trying everything. And nothing. She just wasn't getting enough income and it wasn't stable. So I finally just said, okay, just get off of yourself, Andy. Stop intending for yourself. And I had a particular other in mind. I had a father had written into us because we do an intention of the week, my whole community. And his stepson had broken up with his girlfriend, his first serious girlfriend, and in a fit of existential teenage angst, he chucked himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. Jeez. And he broke pretty much every bone in his body. He got brain damage. He had nerve problems, everything, a mess. And the doctors weren't sure he was going to live. So we set up a healing vigil essentially for Luke, where I got the whole master class to keep sending intention to him. And we did it for about 3 weeks, weekly for 3 weeks. And as soon as she got involved with that, Andy got a call out of the blue, completely out of the blue, from somebody offering her a total dream job. And so problem solved. Same thing with Lisa. Lisa was trying to write a book and was getting nowhere and had gone through 2 editors. She was a practitioner who wanted to get her discovery about de-healing trauma out to the world. And nothing. She wasn't getting anywhere with it. And she was trying everything, all kinds of intentions. She got off of herself, started intending for someone else outside her group. And the next week, she had this total chance meeting with someone she had recognized who turned out to be somebody that, an acquaintance she knew, but she turned out to be an ex-publisher and a writing coach. And she walked Lisa through the whole process, and Lisa ended up with an Amazon bestseller. So, it just on and on and on. It was just amazing. So, there's the altruism. But the other thing that really is an important one is the power of the group. There's an amazing thing. So many people in my masterclass talk about this over and over again. They cry when they and many of them carry on meeting years after the course is ended. And they cry when they talk about it. They say, and they've never even met these people physically. But they're on the Skype with them or Google Hangouts every week still. And they say, this is my intention family. Some of them contact each other every day just to see how they are. Or one guy, Mitchell, is very close to a guy called Robert, and Robert Mitchell said, "Oh yeah, I had some insomnia last night," and Robert said, "Don't worry, I had you covered." He was sending intention to him. And that kind of thing, the idea that this stranger who you haven't met through your kids or grown up with is spending time intending for you, praying for you essentially, who's got your back all the time, is so powerful. And also the whole idea of many cases people solve their health problems by really getting to the root of what was the problem. And these were people who had had it for years and years. And they felt like they were making a vow to their group to do this. And so they had to follow through. So there is this group effect. And the idea that we're part of a larger organism and not just our little selfish self is just so unbelievably strengthening for people.
In the book itself, it sounds like kind of stewards people into maybe perhaps joining a group or even forming their own. Is that kind of the outline of the book? Is that what the end game, if you will, of the book is to be?
Absolutely. I mean, I hope it encourages everyone to be part of a group. In fact, I've got instructions about how to set up your own group, what to do, the experiments you can do with your group. And, it doesn't have to be a physical group. As I say, we've had just as many powerful experiences when people meet virtually, even on the phone, when I do my teleconferences. When I put people into, I have technology to put people into groups, and they're meeting on the phone for the first time, and we have incredible effects. So, yeah, definitely. I would like to see groups in church groups. I'm encouraging, I've been talking to some church organizations to encourage them to put their practitioners into groups and to do the healing intention together. I'd like to see it in business where people create this kind of team intention to work together and I'd also like to see it on a big scale. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing, that I've discovered that was so incredible with some of the big peace intention experiments, as I said, is the healing effects on the participants. But one of the ones that actually gave me an idea, I ran for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And, I was pretty tired of seeing, we've just seen them again this week. I was tired of the buildings coming down, right. What we see on the news every single 9/11. And I thought I'd really like to have an alternative view there, something a lot more healing. So I decided to do a big 9/11 intention experiment, and I invited somebody I know who has hosted me in the Middle East. I've run a number of workshops there and talked there. A guy called Dr. Salah Al-Rashid, who is like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. And he's got tens of thousands of followers all over the Gulf. And so I asked him to be part of this too and to invite his followers. And so we ran an intention experiment that was both in English and in Arabic. And we invited my whole Western audience and audience around the world and his. And we sent intention to lower violence in 2 provinces of southern Afghanistan that were still in the middle of that war. And the evidence after from NATO looked very compelling, like we'd had some sort of effect. There was some unprecedented lowering of violence in just those 2 provinces. It was really brilliant. But the more interesting effect is what happened among the participants, because I ran an instant messaging system and and also I had my Facebook pages and other social media, and we found that they were messaging each other. They were starting to talk together. They were starting to befriend each other. They were starting to say things like, your God is my God is your God. You are like a brother from the other side I can lean on. And they began forgiving each other. And that was really amazing to me. They began saying this was really healing for them. Americans said this was so healing for them being part of this. And so that sparked another idea of mine, which I'm running right now in a few weeks' time, or I believe it's in a couple of days' time from this broadcast. I decided to do an American peace intention experiment because I think America needs some healing right now. Mm-hmm. It's so polarized, unprecedentedly polarized right now. So I've organized a 6-day intention experiment that is going to run from Gaia TV. Mm-hmm. And Gaia TV have very kindly offered to do this completely for free. So we are running 6 half-hour broadcasts, in the middle of which will be an intention and a chance for people to be part of a live experiment where they come together with the tens of thousands of other people on the broadcast, and we send intention to one of the most violent places in America. Now, I'm not going to reveal what the target is yet because I don't want people to start intending for it already, right? Because we are actually doing an experiment. We're going to be measuring the effect afterward. I've got a scientific team that are going to be measuring our effects. But here's the interesting thing. As I said, the big element of it is the peace that radiates out from each person who participates and how that has an incredible transformational effect. Now, people will hear from, in our half-hour broadcasts, I've interviewed a number of scientists. I'm interviewing a number of people who have been part of my Power of 8 groups. We've had 2 groups from the Mile High Church in Denver, near Gaia's offices, be Power of 8 groups and talk about their experiences afterward, their transformational experiences. But I also want our viewers to have transformational experiences, because I've found, with people participating in the peace experiment, there was one woman from France, Sylvie, who said it was incredible afterward because she made some big decisions after being part of that. Never to overwork. She was working night and day when she started the peace experiment, and she just came to a big realization she was never going to be taken advantage of that again. Mm-hmm. But also her partner, who is a big atheist and a big skeptic, participated in the last day of the peace intention experiment. This was 2008. And he had this incredible mystical experience. And he wanted to know and just kept trying to research what on earth had happened to him. And so he's become a believer now. And it's really quite interesting, the big effects and the ripple effects that go on with people in their lives, and how their lives become more peaceful. They become more accepting of people who are not like them and strangers. And that ripples out. And so the big plan is, I hope we'll have some effect in lowering violence. But more importantly, I hope we'll create a wave of peace that ripples out through America and in some small way starts healing some of the division going on.
And what is the broadcast date for that?
The broadcast date it's going to be September 30th through to October 5th. And it's going to be shown at 9 a.m. Pacific, that's 12 noon Eastern, 5 p.m. UK, 6 p.m. European time, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. But that's the ideal time to watch, because that's when the most people will be on, and you'll feel the effects most powerfully. Yeah. But it'll also be broadcast for 24 hours, so you can still see it for the 24 hours if you can't make that time. All you need to do to get the URLs is to sign up, and the sign up is the sign up is www.americanintentionexperiment.com. That's americanintentionexperiment.com. And then you'll get all of the instructions of what to do.
We'll link to that in the show notes for sure. What a beautiful thing. Yeah, there's a few things left on my little list.
Stephen, I just wanted to say, it's so lovely of Gaia, because they are a subscribing system. Yes. They usually charge money. This is completely free to everyone.
Yeah, I'm a subscriber, and I love Gaia, but this is clearly something that should be open to anybody.
Yeah, it is, and all power to them for doing that.
Yeah, that's
too.
Very kind of them. That's a great resource, Gaia. By the way, if anybody's listening is not familiar with it, they have all sorts of programming there. Movies. It's sort of like Netflix for the new age. It's pretty cool.
It is.
So, Lynne, we're almost out of time. I have a few kind of wrap-up questions that more that are kind of, I guess, off topic, but help us learn a little bit more about you, and that are also sort of a way we end all of our conversations, as a way kind of create some through line. First of these, so there's three little quick questions. The first one is, what book or books would you recommend that every person should read, other than, say, The Field, which I will say everybody should read that because it's such a beautiful primer for everything you've just talked about. But what outside of that do you think are some really important resources?
Well, of course, Stephen, I'm going to say The Power of 8 because
that's right. Good for you. Good for you.
I mean, I'm going to say The Power of 8 because I think it's transformational for people, and I would like to see people using it for groups. In terms of people outside myself, some of the books that have really changed my life, certainly Bruce Lipton's The Biology of Belief was just quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book.
Amazing book. And some of the work of Greg Braden is fabulous too. I think so many people are doing wonderful, wonderful books in this area. And, I encourage people to look into them. Bruce's other book, Spontaneous Evolution, is also a really interesting book. And I'm really interested in Ian Wilson's new book, Against Darwin, because in my book, The Bond, I also argued that Darwin was wrong. We're not blind gene machines. We are products of our environment. And genes aren't destiny, as Bruce tells us. So I think what's really going on, which is so interesting, is there is such a big revolution in science, and we're just seeing the beginning of it now.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden are I would kind of group you guys in this wonderful collective of people, kind of talking about science, but bridging it to consciousness, and divorced of all the ancient stories of consciousness, but really just a very kind of tangible view of it. And Greg, I think a film that you were in along with Greg Braden, I think Bruce Lipton's in it, Eric Pearl's in it, The Living Matrix, a wonderful kind of, I think it's on Netflix or YouTube, but people should look at that. It's a wonderful hour and a half of time, and I'll link to that in the show notes. We particularly enjoyed that. Second question is, what thing, item, or keepsake have you held on to the longest, and why?
Oh, boy. Okay. Probably a book that I read in the 70s called The New Journalism. Really affected me. You have to understand that I segued into the subject, but I see myself primarily as a writer. Some of my other compatriots are kind of speakers who have turned into writers. I'm a writer who's turned into a speaker.
Right.
I very much value language and writing. And that book had such a huge effect on me because it was a bunch of early journalists who were writing journalism like fiction. And that really informed some of the way that I like to write. So that's probably a really, really powerful thing that I've held on to.
Interesting. Yeah. And last question is, what have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know? Could be, it's more about a new piece of information, a new discovery perhaps that you think is super important.
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, I discover things all the time for my magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You. So this is probably going to be big and off topic, but, we're discovering things all the time about, for instance, one of the latest things that we're just writing about is how you can reverse diabetes, and how so many things that we think of as requiring huge heroic measures can be done with the kitchen cupboard, just changing diet. How many things can be healed by just changing your attitude or the connections you have? And I think one of the most powerful things that I keep finding new evidence of is the power of connection. That, of all of the vitamin pills we could take, the most powerful one of all is being connected to someone else. I mean, and having connections in your life. If you join a group tomorrow, as Harvard basically said, you will have your chances of dying. So I think, that is one of the most powerful areas that I keep learning new information about.
Well, before we officially sign off, let's be sure to tell everybody the book release information, which I know is forthcoming, and any other upcoming appearances or things that you would like folks to know about.
Okay, I am. The book is The Power of 8, and it's available in all good bookstores and Amazon and other online resources. I've got our intention experiment. That's the AmericanIntentionExperiment.com. People can come and find out all about what I'm doing at LynneMcTaggart.com and my upcoming events. I'm going to be in Denver on September 29th at the Mile High Church. If anyone wants to come see me there and experience the Power of 8 in person, I really invite you to do so. And as I say, just connect with me on LynneMcTaggart.com. We've got Intention Masterclass, Power of 8 Masterclass will be starting soon if they want to be part of that amazing year-long event. And we've got lots of other things coming up, and you'll get news from me every week and blogs that I write myself. So I really invite you to be part of it.
And the book, is it out already, or does it? I'm looking at Amazon. It says September 26th. Is that right, or is it already out?
Yeah, it comes out on September 26th. We're getting a lot of interest in it already, but that's its official release date. That's when you can get it.
Got it. Just
the UK and US, and then it's coming out later in other countries.
So by the time this airs, because we're of course doing this a few weeks prior to release, it will be out in stores. So that's exciting.
Yeah, we're really exciting too. It's a number one new release on Amazon in science category. So I'm already thrilled about that.
That's right. I'm seeing the little orange banner, number one new release. That's wonderful.
Great.
Well, Lynne, thank you for joining us. This has been terrific and so informative, and your eloquence and passion is truly also another thing that I think listeners will benefit from along with the content.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right. That's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this awesome interview with Lynne McTaggart. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including Lynne's site, the American Intention Experiment sign-up page, all the books we discussed, including, of course, The Power of 8 and more. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Lynne McTaggart. That's ownstream.co/LYNNEMCTAGGART. Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual, tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up. Finally, please find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ownstream and be the first to know about new podcast episodes, new blog content, and cool stuff related to our personal journey. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.